A lot of people would be shocked to hear that underage girls are being trafficked in the Spokane area.
Yeah, but it's the truth.
Has a deep understanding of the sex trade because as a girl, she was a slave to it.
It doesn't get talked about enough. I think that it's important because I don't think that bodies need to be commodities. People shouldn't be sold.
And Rebekah feels that conviction to her core. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jane McCarthy.
And I'm Mark Hanrahan. We want to warn you we begin with adult material, and you may find it inappropriate to have young children in the room. But that being said, we think it's important to talk about this very real issue with adults and teenagers because girls are being coerced and forced into the ugly world of sex trafficking.
Tonight, we share one survivor's very personal, sometimes chilling story. It's a story that begins when she was just a vulnerable girl.
We moved to Medical Lake when I was 4 or 5.
It's a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, Rebekah's childhood was scarred by abuse. Her family bounced from Montana to Medical Lake to Spokane and back to Montana again. All the while, Rebekah was physically and sexually abused by a family member turned predator.
I don't know, it just kind of started there. He just was very abusive.
So Rebekah started reaching for ways to dull her feelings of despair.
Well, my sister actually introduced me to smoking cigarettes at 9, and then I started smoking weed probably around 11. I started trying it out, started drinking around that age too. I ran away from home after my 8th grade graduation.
Rebekah fell into drugs and lived on the streets. At the age of 15, she was so desperate for a fresh start, she followed her sister to Georgia. That's where she met a 19-year-old man who would change the course of her life in a way she never dared to dream.
Tall, dark, and handsome. I mean, you just had it all in a package. I mean, he was going to Georgia Tech. He had, lifetime goals. I was infatuated with him. I was also young and dumb and 15.
Rebekah could hardly believe her fortune. For 6 blissful months, she was living a dream.
We went to movies. We wined and dined. He took me skydiving. I mean, he just did everything with me.
Now that you look back on that time, do you know he had a plan for you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you just kind of look back and you say, wow, how naive can you actually be?
She remained naive until the night her boyfriend took her to a house party and shattered his spell.
There were a lot of young girls like me that were there, and I never knew what we were doing, but I was just like, okay, well, whatever. And this girl was like, hey, do you want to try some ecstasy? Do you want to do this? And I was like, no. And she chuckled. She goes, you're going to need it.
Her boyfriend pulled her aside and told her she and all the other girls there were to be sold for sex. When 15-year-old Rebekah told him no, he made it clear it was not her choice.
I know your family and I know your niece and nephew, and I will murder them if you don't do this.
You had no other choice in your mind.
Nope, and he had 7 clients that night that wanted to buy me.
What changed in you that night?
A lot of things changed in me. I mean, being raped 7 times, it's pretty much what it is.
Her boyfriend abruptly transformed into her trafficker.
And a piece of me it died.
While she wanted to run, she was in constant fear she and her family would be killed.
I mean, you're going from 10 to 50 guys a day, maybe more. These girls will be working all night just to get their quota.
Her teenage body had become a commodity.
And it was 3 lines.
This flower on her arm conceals where her trafficker actually branded her as his property.
A barcode on my arm.
I mean, a barcode like packaging.
Yes. Like
a
packaging.
product.
A product, yeah.
Over time, Rebekah was even forced to ensnare other girls into the underworld. One just 11 years old.
So she was just standing on the corner of the road, just ready to get on the bus. All I said was, hey, you want to go get high?
What would happen when you said no?
You wouldn't say no. You don't want to say no.
Because what do you fear will happen?
Oh, they'll beat you. I was brutally beat. And if a girl got out of line, It wasn't a good scenario.
One such scenario happened when Rebekah and another girl plotted to try and outsmart their trafficker and run away.
We ended up getting caught by him, and I ended up in a closet for 3 days. He starved me for 3 days and beat me, and then sold me to the next trafficker.
The next trafficker tortured Rebekah for 24 agonizing hours, then sold her on to the next man. He took her home, where men with guns made sure none of the girls dared to leave.
And that was the day that I decided that I wasn't going to have sex anymore, and that I was going to get a bullet in the back of my head if I needed to, but I was going to figure out how to run.
She was outside with one of her armed captors when he got distracted, and in her bare feet, she just bolted.
I just started running. Like, I just was running. They were chasing, and I ended up getting across the busy main street and then ended up jumping over a fence and then jumping into a garbage can. And I just sat there.
And hid.
And hid. I mean, I should have been shot. Like, I should have been hit by one of those guns, but I wasn't.
Here's where you might think the story turns to a happier place. But here's one big reason minor sex trafficking is so complex. Like countless other girls who clawed their way out of that hell, 15-year-old Rebekah felt she had nowhere to turn. No one was looking for her. She had no job, no home, no support system. Her traffickers had conditioned her to think she was nothing without them. Without anyone telling her otherwise, she was starting to think maybe they were right.
And that sex was all I ever could possibly give anybody in this world.
So she ended up ensnared by a trafficker yet again. And yet again, she almost paid with her life.
And I ended up getting tortured by the cartels. So I was stabbed.
Where were you stabbed?
On my leg. And then I was stabbed up here, and then right back here. They just raped me, stabbed me, and threw me out of a moving vehicle. Would I always be a sex tool? And that's what I thought when I was lying there in the ditch. Like, just take my life now.
It was when she was sprawled out in that ditch that she felt something new wash over her.
Like God was telling me to get up. Like He had a purpose for me. And I held on to that.
Rebekah latched on to the belief her life could be different. The road to recovery was not a direct route, not even close.
This picture, it was a week after I tried to hang myself, because I didn't know how to deal with life after trafficking.
But with the help of Job Corps, a marriage, and now 3 kids, she started to find her way.
But I also didn't know the trauma that I went through. I wasn't told, like, hey, Rebekah, this isn't your fault. So for years, I just felt like it was my fault.
Today, Rebekah is 32 years old and only recently decided to share her story on the topic often seen as too taboo.
People needed to have more of a voice, and it doesn't just have to be mine, but nobody was doing anything, so I was like, well, let the talking begin.
Only now has she started to grasp what happened to her was not her fault. Now, instead of pretending her painful past doesn't exist, she's embracing it, not only for herself, but for the sake of the many girls still suffering in this unforgiving underworld.
I should have been dead. That's one thing that I thank God for.
But you have your life, and what do you see for your life?
To help girls get out of human trafficking.
And she's living that. She now advocates for trafficking victims across Washington and Idaho and Montana and beyond if she's needed. She says she's been in contact with about 150 different girls across the region. She makes herself available to mentor them when they're looking for a way out.
I mean, first of all, good for her for speaking out. And second of all, she touched on it in the story, but for these victims, they don't have any support network or nobody looking for them. That makes it even more challenging for them.
Right, but that's part of why we're talking about this, because there are people out there and organizations out there to help. We're going to talk more about that in detail on KREM 2 News at 6 tomorrow, but here is a good number for people in need of help. Spokane's Lutheran Community Services does offer support to sex trafficking survivors. They do have a 24-hour crime victim crisis line that they can call. It's 866-751-7119. So there are people in our community working to strengthen that safety net, because it hasn't been all that great.
Right.
But they're getting together more and more, and it's getting stronger. So we'll talk about that.
And one of the reasons she wanted to speak out was so this problem would be known, so people could talk about it and hopefully address it, right?
Exactly. So tomorrow on KREM 2 News at 6, in part 2 of this special investigation, as I say, we take a closer look at the problem locally, and then we're going to talk about what law enforcement, task forces here, and advocates are doing to combat the issue here. Why is it important for people to be aware of the problem?
To an extent, we can educate the public on the existence of the threat and what that threat looks like. It's going to help to prevent children from being trafficked.
We'll also hear about an exciting development locally to help trafficking victims. Again, that's tomorrow on KREM 2 News at 6 o'clock.
So nationwide, the average age of a trafficking victim is just 15 years old. And as you just saw, it is happening to real people right here in our community. We have more statistics and ways that you can have a conversation with your kids on how traffickers try to lure children and teenagers. You'll find all of that on krem.com/sellinggirls.